What do you do when you think you've killed the monster that's been haunting your dreams? When the creature that's plagued you for years finally meets its demise? What then? You might expect to feel relief, even joy, but instead you're left with an unsettling hollowness, a chilling emptiness that echoes the vacant stare of the monster itself. That was my experience when I vanquished the beast in my own personal hell, and it wasn't until I encountered the creature again, not as a monster, but as myself, that I truly understood the nature of our shared torment. As a child, I used to wake up from nightmares about being chased through dark and narrow hallways by a creature that seemed straight out of my nightmares. It had a long snout like a dog, but the rest of it looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. Its eyes burned like hot coals, and it moved with unnatural grace and speed. I could never outrun it. It would always catch me, corner me, and then the dream would end with its hot, fetid breath on my neck. I told my parents about these dreams, about this creature that haunted me, but they dismissed it as just a bad dream. Yet those dreams continued to plague me, seeping into my waking hours. I would feel the panic rising within me as I walked through the halls of my school or my office building, convinced that the monster was behind me, ready to pounce. The fear was so intense that at times I could barely breathe, but the scariest part was that I started seeing the monster in my waking life as well, catching glimpses of it out of the corner of my eye, feeling its presence brush against me like a cold draft. My mind was playing tricks on me. I was losing my sanity, so I sought help, pouring my heart out to a therapist, hoping for some understanding, some relief, but she only offered me a sympathetic smile and a prescription for medication that dulled my senses and emotions, turning my world into a gray, lifeless canvas. Determined to conquer my fears, I decided to face the monster head-on. Instead of running from it, I started confronting it, trying to fight back against the creature that had become my greatest enemy. And as we battled, I began to notice similarities between us, our movements, our strengths, our weaknesses. The more we fought, the more I realized that there was more to this monster than just a terrifying beast. It was a part of me, something I had buried deep inside myself for years. It took months of intense inner work, facing my deepest traumas and unresolved emotional wounds. But slowly, I began to understand that the monster wasn't a separate entity at all. It was me, the dark, repressed parts of my psyche that I had ignored and rejected for so long. The beast was my pain, my anger, my fear, and my shame made manifest. It was everything I didn't want to acknowledge, let alone accept, and it had been tormenting me because I refused to confront it. But once I realized this, everything changed. The monster became me, and I became the monster. We were one and the same, and in that realization, I found peace. You see, the truth is we all have monsters within us. Dark aspects of ourselves that we try to keep hidden away. We repress our negative emotions and bury them deep inside, hoping they'll just go away. But that never works. Those buried emotions don't disappear. They manifest themselves in other ways, often as physical symptoms or psychological disorders. I know this because after I integrated my monster, I stopped having nightmares. The anxiety lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of peace and clarity. I no longer felt the need to escape or hide from my problems. Instead, I faced them head-on, knowing that I had the strength and resilience to overcome anything, and that's when my life really began to change for the better. But not everyone is so lucky. Some people carry their monsters with them for years, allowing them to grow and fester until they become too much to bear. These are the people who end up in my office, broken and desperate for help, but often resistant to the idea that the monster they're running from is actually a part of themselves. Take Sarah, for example. She came to me convinced that she was being stalked by a mysterious figure who seemed to appear out of nowhere. This stalker had been following her, watching her, and it terrified her. As we worked together, Sarah began to realize that the stalker wasn't a separate person, but a manifestation of her own self-hatred. She had been so hard on herself for so long that she had created a monster that represented all of her worst qualities. Then there was Mark, who believed he was being hunted by a shadowy government agency. He was sure they were out to get him, that they were controlling his thoughts and actions. As we delved deeper into his past, we discovered that Mark's monster wasn't an external threat, but his own repressed trauma. He had been through a horrific experience as a child that he had buried deep inside himself. But that trauma had manifested as a monster that he couldn't escape. These are just two examples of the many people I've encountered who are tormented by monsters that are actually a part of themselves. The truth is, we all have these dark aspects lurking within us, waiting for us to acknowledge and accept them. But many people are too afraid to do that. They're afraid of what they might find if they look within, so they run from it, trying to escape the monster by changing jobs, moving to a new city, even ending their own lives. But running doesn't work, because the monster will always find you. It will always be a part of you, and the only way to stop the torment is to turn around and face it. It's not easy, but it's necessary, because by embracing our monsters, we can learn to forgive ourselves. We can learn to love ourselves. And in doing so, we can set ourselves free. You may think that I'm oversimplifying things, that mental health issues are too complex to be explained by simple concepts like self-love and forgiveness. But I've seen firsthand how effective this approach can be. I've watched as people who were once tormented by monsters have gone on to live happy, fulfilling lives. That's why I continue to do this work, to help others see that they are not their monsters, that they are capable of overcoming their darkest challenges, and that they deserve to live a life free from fear and pain. It's not always easy. Many people are resistant to the idea that they can be their own tormentors. They cling to the belief that there must be an outside force causing their suffering. But I know the truth. And I've seen it in their eyes, when they finally make the connection, the realization that dawns on their faces when they understand that they are the monster and the monster is them. That moment of clarity is worth all the struggles, all the setbacks, all the times I've been doubted or ridiculed, because in that moment, I see hope. I see the possibility of healing and growth. I see that they are not defined by their monsters. They are defined by their courage, their strength, and their willingness to face the darkness and bring it into the light, where it can finally be acknowledged, accepted, and loved. When I first started practicing, I struggled with the idea that I could help people overcome their deepest fears and darkest traumas. I was young and inexperienced, and I didn't know if I was making a difference. But then I met someone who changed everything. She was a patient who had been struggling for years with crippling anxiety and panic attacks. She had tried everything: medication, therapy, even alternative treatments, but nothing had worked. She was desperate, and I was determined to help her. I worked with her to explore her past, to uncover the root of her anxiety and the repressed emotions that were causing it, and slowly but surely she began to heal. Her panic attacks lessened, and she started to feel like herself again. She began to trust me and open up in ways she never had before. And in doing so, she taught me the true meaning of empathy, compassion, and unconditional positive regard. She showed me that I could make a difference in someone's life, and that was incredibly empowering. With each passing year, I've continued to learn and grow as a practitioner. I've read countless books, attended workshops and seminars, and never stopped learning. I've worked with people from all walks of life, each with their own unique set of challenges and struggles. And through it all, I've remained dedicated to my mission of helping others see that they are not their monsters. I've seen firsthand the transformative power of self-acceptance and the incredible strength and resilience of the human spirit. Now, whenever I work with a new patient, I remember that first patient who taught me so much about healing and growth. Her courage inspires me every day to be a better listener, a more compassionate healer, and a truer friend. So if you're struggling with your mental health, please reach out for help. Don't let your monsters define you. Embrace them, accept them, and love them, because that's the only way to truly be free. Thank you. This is the story of the patient who checked out after death. It was a busy day at the hospital where I work. We were all very tired, because we had been on our feet for more than 12 hours straight. It was also raining heavily that day, and to make matters worse, several ambulances arrived at the emergency room, one after another, with people who had accidents on the roads due to the rain. The hospital staff got very busy all of a sudden, and it felt like we would never get a break. We were running around like headless chickens. At some point during this chaos, an elderly woman was brought in on a stretcher. I couldn't see her face because she was covered with a sheet, but I noticed that there was a death certificate hanging outside the stretcher. The patient was already dead when they brought her to the emergency room, but we still needed to perform a number of tests to determine the cause of death. You know how it is. Sometimes even death can be complicated. That's why we need to be thorough. After examining the old woman, we transferred her to the morgue, which was full at the time. There was no room left for the deceased patient, so we put her in an available ambulance and told the driver to keep her inside until we could find space for her in the morgue. A few minutes later, I heard commotion coming from the direction of the morgue. I went out into the hallway and saw my colleagues carrying stretchers back and forth. There were so many bodies in the morgue that they were now bringing them out onto the sidewalk. I couldn't believe my eyes. They laid the bodies in rows on the sidewalk under the awning of the hospital. Some were covered with sheets, others were not. I suddenly realized that the elderly woman I had seen earlier was among them. It was about 2 in the morning by then. We had just finished attending to a patient in the emergency room when one of my colleagues called me into the hallway. "Come here quickly," he said. You won't believe what just happened. I hurried over and asked, "What's going on?" He pointed to the body of the elderly woman lying on the sidewalk. "She's gone," he said, motioning toward the body with his chin. I walked up to the body and realized that the patient had regained consciousness. I immediately rushed to the patient and asked, "Are you okay?" The woman looked at me with blank eyes and responded weakly, "I feel fine." What did she mean? Was she joking? How could she joke about being fine when she was dead? I don't want to scare you, but I'm going to tell you exactly what happened next. The skin around the woman's lips had already begun to turn blue. Her fingers and toes were ice cold to the touch. I could feel no pulse, not on her wrist, her neck, or her groin. Normally, if a person has died, the body will begin to stiffen within 24 hours. That's called rigor mortis. But this wasn't the case with the woman. She didn't show any signs of life, but her entire body was soft, as though rigor mortis hadn't set in yet. This is usually only the case for the first 2 hours after death, but the woman had been dead for much longer. "Can you hear me?" I asked. The woman nodded slowly. "Do you know where you are?" I continued. Again, she nodded slowly. "How do you feel?" She responded in a barely audible voice. "Like I have a hole in my stomach," she said, wincing. My colleague and I looked at each other in disbelief. Was this really happening? I immediately pressed the call button to contact the doctor. When he arrived, he performed a number of tests, including compressions and defibrillation, but nothing worked. He looked at me with a puzzled expression and said, "We should transfer her to intensive care. Maybe we can still save her." What? But she was dead, and as far as I know, you can't bring someone back to life once they've died. But I didn't argue with the doctor. Instead, I followed him as he wheeled the woman's stretcher into the elevator. In intensive care, the doctors carried out numerous examinations and tried everything to resuscitate the woman, but nothing worked. After about an hour, the head doctor came into the room. "There's nothing more we can do," he said. "She's dead." I knew that, but what did her family say? I asked. "They haven't arrived yet," the doctor replied, "but we have to prepare her for burial anyway. Would you like to accompany me?" he asked me. I hesitated for a moment before answering, "Yes." When we entered the room, several doctors and nurses were present. As the doctor began to close the woman's eyelids, one of the nurses whispered something to him. He listened and then nodded slowly. "I think it's time we let her go," he said. I didn't understand what he meant. Let her go? Go where? Did he mean she would be buried soon? Then I noticed something strange. The woman's hand, which had been icy cold before, was now warm. I took her hand and squeezed it. It felt real. I immediately called for a nurse and told her to check the patient's vital signs. The nurse examined the woman and cried out in surprise. "She has a pulse," she exclaimed. "Her heart is beating." At that moment, the doctor who had come with me from intensive care spoke. "She's alive," he said with a trembling voice. The other doctors and nurses stared at him in disbelief. Nobody dared to speak for a long time. The news that the patient was alive spread quickly through the hospital. More and more doctors gathered around the bed and began examining the woman. One of the doctors explained that the woman's body had started to shut down. All the vital functions slowed down, her heart stopped beating, and eventually her breathing stopped as well. She died. But apparently that didn't happen fast enough for her relatives. You see, the woman's daughter had called the hospital earlier to inquire about her mother's condition. The doctors told her that her mother was still alive, but seriously ill. Then the daughter decided to end her mother's life on her own. She arrived at the hospital shortly thereafter and brought along a priest to baptize the dying woman. When the family left the room again, the woman's condition stabilized unexpectedly. Doctors were puzzled by the case and wanted to keep the woman in the hospital for further observation. However, her family insisted on taking her home. They signed a waiver saying they were responsible for any consequences. The doctors had no choice but to comply with the family's wishes. Since then, we have received numerous phone calls from the woman's family. They called to tell us that she had recovered and thanked us for saving their mother's life. This case raises many questions for me. First of all, how is it possible for someone to be dead and then come back to life? Is there such a thing as a near-death experience? And secondly, why did the woman's family want to end her life in the first place? Sure, it's hard to watch your loved one suffer from an illness, but isn't life sacred? Can we ever do something like that to another human being? I still can't understand why the family wanted to end the woman's life, but I'm glad that she's alive today. I am also grateful that we were able to stabilize her condition. Sometimes I wonder how different her life would be if we had UNT managed to bring her back to life. Would she have married her sweetheart after high school? Would she have traveled to distant countries? Would she have had children? Unfortunately, we will never know the answers to these questions. It is incredible to me that a person can die and then come back to life. I hope that the doctors managed to find out what actually happened to the woman. I will never forget the astonishment and joy that radiated from the doctors and nurses that day. We had succeeded in what we had never thought possible. We had brought a dead person back to life. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the doctors and nurses who do an incredible job every day. Not everyone understands what it's like to work in a hospital. Many people probably think we're just cold and heartless. Well, that may be true for some hospitals and some employees, but not for all of us. For many of us, working in a hospital is a calling. We're not just doing a job, we're saving lives. If you have ever had a positive experience with a doctor or nurse, please write a comment below and tell us about it. Thank you for watching. Until next time. I remember distinctly the day that the world changed for me. It was during my sophomore year in high school. I had just come back from lunch and walked into my physics classroom. Our teacher, Mr. Williams, was waiting for us with an unusual grin on his face. "Good afternoon, class," he said enthusiastically. "Today we have a special visitor with us." He gestured to the corner of the room where a man was sitting who looked about 40 years old. He wore a black shirt, black pants, and black shoes. His hair was slicked back, and he seemed distinguished, intelligent, mysterious. He introduced himself as Mr. X. "Mr. X is the owner of a company that builds elevators," Mr. Williams said, "and today he wants to give you a little demonstration." We all stared at Mr. X expectantly. The only sound in the room was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, Mr. X stood up and walked towards the chalkboard. "Do you know how an elevator works?" he asked. I did. At age 15, I knew quite a bit about elevators. My grandfather was an elevator mechanic, and I used to spend summers working with him. But I was curious to see what Mr. X would say, so I just sat quietly and listened. He explained how an elevator has a motor at its core that uses electromagnets to control its speed and direction. He showed us some complex diagrams of the mechanics involved, and then he turned to us and smiled. "Now here's the problem," he said. "My company needs an elevator for a building in Manhattan. The elevator will go from the ground floor to the top floor. It must be fast, reliable, safe. You know, the usual stuff. But there is one catch. The elevator can only go down. It cannot go up." We were confused. I was especially confused because I thought this was impossible. How could an elevator that can only go down serve a building in Manhattan? I mean, it wouldn't even get you off the ground. But Mr. X continued, "We believe that there is a solution to this problem, and we want your help in finding it. Does anyone know how we can do it?" All the students started whispering and talking. Some were standing up, walking around the room. Others were slumped over in their seats. Everyone except me. I was scared. I didn't want to be the first person to answer. If I got it wrong, everyone would laugh at me. And if I got it right, well, I still didn't want to be the first person to answer. So I sat quietly for a few minutes until finally someone called out, "You can make it longer and slower so it takes longer to go down, and you can use the time to turn the motor off and let gravity bring the elevator up again." Silence. Mr. Williams looked at the student, then at Mr. X. Then he looked back at us and said, "That is actually a very good idea, but unfortunately, it won't work. You see, the problem isn't just that the elevator can only go down. The building itself can only go down. When you step inside, you won't just be going down physically, you will also be going down mentally. You will be stripped of your hopes, dreams, and ambitions. You will be emptied of everything that makes you human. In other words, the elevator will take away your soul." Another uncomfortable silence filled the room. Mr. Williams continued, "Mr. X here wants to hire one of you to ride this elevator. He will pay you $1 million, and you can take anything you want with you. But once you enter the elevator, there's no turning back. Are you willing to do it?" I looked around the room at my classmates. They were pale, shaken, frightened. I was too. But there was something inside of me that wouldn't let me look away from Mr. X. I couldn't understand it then, but looking back, I think it was the same thing that made me want to be the last person to answer his question. I felt like I was being pulled towards the elevator shaft by an invisible force. One by one, my classmates started to back away from the chalkboard, shaking their heads. "No, thank you," they said. Soon there was no one left. I was standing next to the chalkboard, the only person who hadn't answered. "So that's a yes?" Mr. Williams asked. I nodded silently. Mr. Williams turned to Mr. X. "I think we have a volunteer." Mr. X smiled and extended his hand. "Excellent," he said. "Come with me now and I will show you the wonders that await you." The next thing I knew, I was stepping into the elevator. Inside there was a single button. It was located at the bottom of a shaft, and when pressed, it emitted a faint red glow. Below the button was a small plaque that read, "Do not press this button under any circumstances." I looked up at Mr. X, who was smiling at me enigmatically. "What does the button do?" I asked. Mr. X took a step back and put his hands behind his back. "That," he said, "is for you to find out." Then he turned off the lights and stepped out of the elevator, leaving me alone in total darkness. At first, everything seemed normal. I heard the elevator motor whir to life and the cables pulling on the counterweight, bringing the elevator car up to a stop. But then I heard a faint clicking noise coming from the shaft above me. It sounded like hail, but it wasn't hail. It sounded like fingernails scraping against metal. Then the scratching got louder and louder until suddenly a voice boomed through the shaft. "Who's up there?" I froze. Was I hearing things? Was this part of the plan? Mr. X wanted to scare me? But why? And why would he send someone else in after me? Maybe it was another test. A test to see if I was worthy of the prize money. "Hello," I said, trying to sound brave. "Is someone there?" No answer. I was about to call out again when the elevator lurched downward with a jolt. I gasped and stumbled forward. The clicking stopped and footsteps echoed above me. Someone or something was coming down the shaft. Then the light flickered on. I looked up and saw a dark figure descending slowly on a ladder. The figure climbed down the ladder rung by rung, until finally it reached the elevator and opened the door. Standing in front of me was a man. He was tall and thin, with sharp features and piercing eyes. He was dressed in a black suit and a black hat, and as he stepped into the elevator, I noticed a small red button in his hand. It was the same red as the glow from the button at the bottom of the shaft. "Who are you?" I asked. "Why are you here?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and pressed the button. The elevator lurched downward and started moving fast. We went down so quickly that my stomach flipped over. The man pressed another button, and the elevator screeched to a halt. When I stepped out, I found myself in a dark, dank basement. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. As I looked around, I realized that I wasn't alone. There were dozens of other people down here. Men, women, and children. They were all dressed in different clothes from different eras, but they all had one thing in common. Their eyes were blank and soulless. The man in the black suit approached me and whispered in my ear, "Welcome to the basement." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the darkness with the other captives. Now, you might be wondering what the basement is. Well, I don't know. That's why I'm telling you this story. The fact is, this basement exists beneath New York City. It's hidden deep underground where no light or sound can penetrate, and it's filled with people who have lost their souls. You may be asking yourself, why am I telling you all this? Well, it's because I need your help. Mr. X is planning to open up another elevator shaft and fill the basement with more people. I'm the only one who knows about it, and I'm afraid that if he finds out I told you, I'll be sent down there to join the others. There's only one way to stop this. We need to destroy the elevator. Can you help me? If you can, please contact me at the number provided below. I believe there's a way we can destroy the elevator together. But if you don't help me, the elevator will be built, and more people will lose their souls forever. Thank you for listening. Now, please go. Before you leave, please take this card. It has the number written on it. Mr. X will be watching you. If he finds out you've been here, you'll be next. Please hurry.